This was the most exciting thing I'd ever experienced in my life. And years and years and years later, when I was trying to figure out what I really wanted to do with my career, I realized that had led me to racing of every stripe in the 50s and 60s in California. Gurney became our hero. I mean, there was so much racing going on that if you weren't involved in it, what was wrong with you?
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Horsepower Heritage. I'm Maurice Merrick. And greetings to all of you listening from places like Farmingdale, New York, Louisville, Kentucky, Tucson, Arizona, Bangkok, Thailand, Stuttgart, Germany, and Putney, England. Well, here we are at episode 100 of Horsepower Heritage, and it's a milestone for sure. Because podcasting is an open platform for all sorts of interests, and it's still a young medium, and making it to 100 episodes is pretty rare. So I was hopeful, but not entirely sure that anyone would care enough to invest their time to listen to what I had to say. I just wanted to tell good stories and interview cool people. So from day one, I told myself, as long as I focused on quality and a depth of exploration, people would get it. And you've done exactly that. You're a loyal and enthusiastic audience, and I owe so much to you. So I'm not celebrating this milestone alone. You're right here with me. So many of you have gotten in touch over Instagram and LinkedIn and email, and I truly appreciate all the kind words and the conversations we've had. So thank you for being huge fans of the podcast. So this whole thing got started over some cocktails in, 2018, when a friend of mine suggested that we do a podcast, and I thought that was a pretty good idea. Now, my background is in television production and in documentaries particularly, so I had some experience to draw on, and I hit the ground running. I had no idea how it would turn out, but I did know that there were people like me out there who just love cars and motorcycles and racing and all the history behind this stuff. And here we are at episode 100. I've told the stories of people like Henry Ford and Virgil Exner and Jackie Stewart. I've interviewed incredible racing drivers like Patrick Long and Emerson Fittipaldi. Reflecting on all of this is humbling, and I'm truly blessed to be able to bring you these stories. I think I've made this podcast unlike anything else you'll find, and I'm proud of that. To sum it up, I want to say thank you to each and every one of you who listen. So stay with me because I promise you the next 100 episodes are going to be hard on the throttle with guests and stories you won't find anywhere else. And today's episode and my guest exemplify the stories I absolutely love. I can't tell you how much I admire this man. He built his life and career around a love for racing and high-performance cars, and along the way, he not only became friends with some of the greatest names in the business, but he's made his own indelible mark on the celebration and preservation of automotive history. His name is Terry Karges, and he's the executive director of the Petersen Automotive Museum in Los Angeles. And Terry has been the driving force that makes the place tick every day for thousands of visitors. He's just the best kind of car guy, and at the end of the day, I thought, what would be better for the 100th episode than to have him share the stories of his incredible career? Now, I have to mention, one of the significant milestones this year is the 75th anniversary of Porsche. And the Petersen Museum has an amazing exhibit right now that chronicles that history. So I want to highlight that. We're going to talk about that today, but there's much more to hear. So with that, I give you episode 100 of Horsepower Heritage with my friend, Terry Karges. And that's coming up right after this. This episode of Horsepower Heritage is sponsored by Model Citizen Diecast. No matter what's in your garage, you can fit all your automotive heroes on a shelf. And they've got you covered, whether it's 1/43rd scale, 1/18th scale, or even the ginormous 1/8 scale masterpieces from the Amalgam Collection. Go to modelcitizendiecast.com and get 10% off when you use the promo code HERITAGE at checkout. Limitations apply. From race cars to street cars and everything in between, it's Model Citizen Diecast, because your inner child still wants to play with cars.
Terry, thanks for having us in today. This is a real treat, and I've been looking forward to it. For people who don't know, what is the Petersen Museum?
Petersen Museum is the automotive museum in Los Angeles, the home of car culture, the home of hot rods, the home of Hot Rod Magazine, and it's actually an expression from Bob Petersen, who created Hot Rod Magazine, that covered hot rod culture and then the automotive culture of Southern California and America from 1948 through many, many years until he sold the company. But he created really a publishing empire. And so you could start with saying the Petersen Museum is a result of automotive journalism. His success allowed him to buy this building and then really buy the building back from the Natural History Museum, who started the museum in 1994. Petersen was on the board of directors, as was Bruce Meyer at the Natural History, and they decided that an automotive museum in Los Angeles would be a great job. So they opened it in '94. Bob Petersen bought it outright from the History Museum in 2000, and here we are, voted world's best automotive museum twice in the last 5 years.
What makes it special among car museums?
I guess I'd have to say what makes it special but in car museums, first and foremost, we're in Los Angeles, and we have an extraordinary building that has been built out with, we have 11 galleries, which we change out annually. Each gallery gets a brand new exhibit every year. So not only are we in the home of car culture, but we do something that no other car museum does, which is an extraordinary number of new exhibits that really talk to all the various cultures of automotive interests. My early career was in the theme park entertainment business, and with 3 different theme parks, starting with Disney, and each of them lasted 4 years. And then I got into the automotive business and motorsports. So when I came in, I had a different kind of a background that from a nonprofit museum exhibit curator. Here we'll do something, and it can talk to some very special or finite interests, but my look at what we had to do was, if we can't sell tickets, if we can't interest a lot of the population in what we want to do, we're not going to be in business, and we're certainly not going to grow. So we decided that if you can educate them, but if you don't entertain them, they're not coming back, and so that has served us quite well.
Were there any big lessons that you took from that experience and applied them here?
Biggest lessons that I've learned from the theme parks or learned in the theme parks was my initial 4 years at Disneyland. It's the real education in entertainment and quality entertainment. It certainly was in those days. But it's cleanliness and friendliness. You've got to be, you've got to greet people and remember that they're here for the first time, and a smile and maybe the best thing that happens to them all day, but a greeting goes beyond that. And then cleanliness. Our building, we're blessed with an incredible facilities team, but our building is as clean as it was the day we opened. And when we redid everything and reopened in December 5th of 15. In fact, my wife's girlfriend says, if I'm in this part of Los Angeles, this is the only place I'll go to the bathroom. We're proud of that, by the way.
You should be. Southern California has been, for decades, the epicenter of car culture. So growing up, what were the experiences that stand out to you?
You know, the epicenter, question of is this or was this, is it still the epicenter of car culture? We moved from Joliet, Illinois in 1955 to Newport Beach. In the summer of 1955, my father took us to the Torrey Pines road races, which is now where the Torrey Pines golf course is. overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Haven't seen it before. Beautiful summer day in La Jolla, and here are D-Jags, Triumphs, every exotic car imaginable racing with Castrol R in the air, the sweet smell of the bean oil, and these exotic cars. We pulled a family wagon up to the snow fence, which was then your protective barrier in those days, and next to it, a Rolls Royce with a big wicker basket picnic going out, and a gull wing on the other side of us, and they've got another big picnic basket. That was at the end of that day, and we're leaving the track. I was in the back seats. Dad, we got to do this. This was the most exciting thing I'd ever experienced in my life. And years and years and years later, when I was trying to figure out what I really wanted to do with my career, I realized that had led me to racing of every stripe in the 50s and 60s in California. Drag racing. I can't remember how many drag strips there were in Southern California, but if you weren't at a drag strip in Corona del Mar, which is next to Newport Beach, we had a circular drive-in, Merle's Drive-In, and all the best hot rods in Orange County would show up there Friday, Saturday night, and cars would come down from Pasadena, and we'd race back up at the top of the hill, back down towards the beach. It was incredible. And the road racing at Riverside opened in '57. We were there for the first race. We made all of the races that they did up there with NASCAR and sports car racing. Gurney became our hero. But you saw people Richard Petty, when he was like in one of his first races, Lee Petty, his father, one of his last races, Fireball Roberts with a cigar, and no nets in the doors in those days, but drag racing at Lions. There was so much racing going on that if you weren't involved in it, what was wrong with you? I was in a car club called the Gargoyles, but it was a car club with plaques for the back windows of your car. It was a part of culture that I embraced, and I couldn't get enough of it. And my friends were all the same. If you weren't in a car or going someplace or polishing your car or doing something with cars, you belonged to a different group.
And it wasn't just car enthusiasts, but the aftermarket industry, speed equipment, guys like Ed Pink and Ed Iskandarian, it was all here. We were celebrating Alex Exidius's 101st birthday, and talking about the experiences that all of them had as kids growing up and what was happening. And they would go to Vic Edelbrock's shop, a little bitty shop, and all of the guys, Pink and Iskey and all those guys, at night, and they'd be bench racing, but also sharing, how do you make this go faster? What are you going to do? What can we do here? What we can do there? What can we build to make this thing go faster? But it was Bob Petersen who helped spark the culture. SEMA and the aftermarket industry, SEMA was created by Bob Petersen. Petersen put on the first SEMA show at Dodger Stadium, and then they moved it to Anaheim, and then it's grown and grown, and now it's the biggest show in Las Vegas. What Petersen, he was in a PR business for the film industry. When the guys came back from the war, he lost his job there, and had to figure out what to do. And this crazy man who used to sell big appliances on TV by screaming and yelling hired him because he wanted to do a car show. Petersen put a book together and sold ads in it to guys that were in the automotive business, and afterward discovered, maybe I got something here. So he created Hot Rod Magazine from that in 1948, and he had to write the copy for the guys, take the pictures of their products, put it together in a book, and these guys said, yeah, this guy Petersen would come around and we'd give him a couple of bucks for an ad. But suddenly, now I'm getting orders for stuff from Ohio or Pennsylvania or New Jersey, and it never happened before because I had a little walk-in shop. And so as it grew and grew, Petersen had collected all the real hot rod guys. Alex Exidius worked for him and became a famous cameraman. Wally Parks worked for him, and during the weekdays worked for Petersen. On the weekends he was racing. Petersen gave him the money to start the NHRA. So if you look at Hot Rod Magazine being an epicenter, Southern California being an epicenter, Petersen was capturing all this and was heavily involved at Riverside with road racing and NASCAR racing. He had helped start SEMA and NHRA. I don't know how much more of an epicenter you can create.
Yeah, for sure. Now, Wally Parks was the first editor of Hot Rod, was he not?
Yeah. That's my understanding.
Okay. Yeah, that's how I always heard it.
He had multiples of editors,
right?
Of course.
And then, of course, there was Carcraft and...
Carcraft, he had, 15, 20 books on cars.
Right. Terry, let's talk about your racing heroes. You mentioned Dan Gurney. Obviously, Phil Hill was a very important guy to you.
I had so many heroes. When we were kids in Illinois, on Memorial Day, we used to set the radio up on the outside stairs in the house, and then we had a course set up so that we had our own Indy 500 on our bicycles. And all of the drivers were my heroes. That it was one of those, but above them all, Bill Vukovich. Vuki was the guy, and then to lose him on almost winning his third in a row was something that was a lesson about what the sport is. Actually, going back into that first race at Torrey Pines, the very first race. On the first turn, a woman in a car crashed and was killed. And that was another wake-up call. I'd had the knowledge that could happen in racing because of Indy, and now I'm witnessing it. We were right there. But Gurney would probably be my first big hero in racing because it was so obvious that everyone at Riverside in 1957 and from there on was rooting for Gurney because he was the local hero. But he was also faster than shit. He was the guy. But then I knew about Phil Hill. Phil was this cool Santa Monica guy, but Phil was in Europe. But that made it extra cool because he's in this thing called Formula One that we don't really get to see. But I could read about it in Road and Track and see the cars that he was driving, and then you're learning about the Mille Miglia and the Panamericana and racing at Monza. Just all of these wonderful things. Tazio Nuvolari, Fangio, Sterling Moss, bigger than life people. But there were also guys over here, Scooter Patrick in a 904. Watching Scooter Patrick in a 904 at Riverside was like a ballet. In turn 6, he'd come in, throw the car into opposite lock, stay on the gas, and drive through the turn and never miss an inch off of his line every lap through. But Lothar Machenbacher, I wasn't that much of a fan of a lot of the Europeans, but the Americans. I saw Fireball Roberts at Riverside with a cigar in his mouth, giving a finger to the guy alongside of him, Joe Weatherly, as they went down the back chute. Mark Donohue was a huge hero, almost untouchable. Roger Penske in his cars, his stuff was always impeccably turned out. It was perfect.
Parnelli.
Parnelli was Parnelli. It was. You couldn't make this stuff up. Parnelli went off the track in turn, 9 at Riverside? At the end of the straight. It was the first lap, they were 4 deep, he was on the outside, missed the turn completely, went out in the dirt, drove back around, and came back. This was a Trans Am race, the last official Trans Am race. He was in the Bud Moore Mustang, and on the last lap, in the last turn, he passed Fulmer on the high side, which is virtually impossible to do, and won the race. And I got a chance to talk to him about it later, and he said, "That's how you win." I was not going to lose that race, but I saw him also in the S's in a Chrysler or in a Plymouth in the first years of Riverside, the S's on the edge had tires, like half tires. He came out late at one of the races and just drove straight through the off the road, on the road, off the road, on the road, and the tires are flying up. And I said, "What were you thinking about?" He says, "Mom always said the fastest way was a straight line." His car control, and then meeting guys like the Unsers. I was enamored with the Unsers because of their stuff up Pikes Peak, and I had an opportunity to have dinner with Bobby Unser, and he was telling me about Parnelli, who was a really good friend of his. And in fact, Unser used to drive, when Parnelli was going to race at Riverside, he would drive over and sleep on Parnelli's couch. Parnelli met him when they were on the mountain, and he tried to tell Bobby, "You're fast enough, you need to go to Indy." And Bobby said, "No, I could never do that. I couldn't do that." Parnelli called him one day and said, "Bobby, I got a car for you. You got to get back there. You got to be there by this date. It's your rookie test. You got to go do it." And he did it, and then the rest is history. I mean, for quite a long time, he was the fastest man on an oval. But heroes, I mean, I had a chance to work for a couple of years with K.K. Rosberg in Can-Am. It was one of the best couple of racing years I've ever enjoyed. He was as fast and as dangerous and as brave as any driver I've ever seen. I mean, he would, at Watkins Glen, he found a way in this chicane that they had done, that if you didn't lift as you went into the chicane and you bounced the car off the left bump, it would launch you to the right one, and you could get through. He says you couldn't do it for the whole race, but it was great for qualifying. I mean, he was so bloody fast, but also just possessed. And that was really exciting to me, that here's this Finn that he would debrief the crew, get out of the car, debrief the crew, and then get on the phone, and all he talked about was Formula One, the Formula One. And then I was with him when he clinched the world title in Vegas at the Caesar's Palace race, Formula One, when he was driving for Williams. Jim Busby, we grew up with Jim Busby. I had the opportunity to help Buzz with put Coors on a car. My brother was his first sponsor, Beverly Porsche Audi, and then when he went to BMW, he was Ocean Motors on the car. So, yeah, I had the influences. I mean, Busby was a drag racer. And when he was, I think, 18, we met him in Newport Beach. He had just moved from Pasadena, and he had in his house, he had this white shag carpet, but he had a top fuel engine disassembled so on what was now a gray carpet. But this is pure racing all the time.
Was he a bachelor at the time?
No. He had married Susie, his wife.
All right.
But
I'm just picturing a disassembled engine in the house.
Yeah,
that's a good wife.
Oh no, I mean, and it was essentially racing becomes everything.
Sure.
You know, especially at that level, and somebody who's that good. And Buzz was one of those guys that had a knack for publicity and style, and his stuff was always beautifully turned out, and he was bloody fast. So he ended up racing with the greats. He won Le Mans a couple times and won a bunch of IMSA races and had a great career.
Also a good salesman.
One of the best.
Yeah, because you got to get sponsors.
But one of the best, yeah. And Dan, I ended up working with Dan, and we ended up putting the Toyota deal together for Dan, and it was watching Dan work with the Toyota board was magic. You know, we were in Toyota City and finally made a deal to take and start the GTU program. And then at the end of the meeting, everybody shaking hands. We had made a deal for the sponsorship. And then he says, "I only have one question. Why do you want to lose racing? Why are you doing this the wrong way?" And everyone was in shock. "What are you talking about? He said, "There's not nearly enough money in this deal to do it right. You're a factory, right? You're going to do this." And he was right. So they doubled the money, and the rest was off to the races. But Dan had come from an era where, you know, he and Shelby were at Indy when Goodyear wanted to go to Indy. And there were a bunch of cars that had tested on a number of Goodyear tires. They were going to start the race. Night before, they switched back to Firestone. So all the Goodyear brass was in the stands, and they say, what happened? So the chairman said, be in my office Tuesday morning after Labor Day, or after Memorial Day. And they made the deal then that Goodyear would, he said, I don't care what it takes, build me some cars. I'm going to be in that race. So they said, all right, well, to guarantee that, we'll build the cars. Thus was All-American Racers born at that moment. Dan was smart. Shelby was just as smart. They also said, okay, we want to sell Goodyear racing tires. We'll set up the distributorship for Goodyear racing tires and build the cars. And Dan said, okay, we'll do this for Indy, but you're going to take us to Formula One as well. So, and that ended with Dan winning the only ever American-built car by an American driver with an American engine.
The Gurney Eagle.
And Gurney Eagle in '67 at Nürburgring. I'm sorry, Spa.
Terry, I'm a little bit confused. Why did they switch from Goodyear back to Firestone at the last minute?
They didn't trust him.
Oh, they didn't trust him?
Yeah.
Interesting.
It was a brand new tire. Yeah. Firestone had always been the tire,
right.
and Goodyear wanted to break into the market. So if the only way we can do that is build our own cars and enter them, that's what we're going to do. Dan ended up, the partnership between Dan and Shelby lasted about a month. That might be an exaggeration, but not much. But Dan took the cars and Shelby took the distribution and got rich. I mean, he had the Goodyear tire distribution for the Midwest and East for years. I mean, years. It's a printing money.
Were they butting heads?
I think Shelby butted heads with everybody.
Sure.
I mean,
yeah.
And Dan was Dan, that his own man, his own character. Dan was such a pure racer, and Shelby was a business guy. He was a racer, but he was also a business guy. What Dan ended up with, though, was Phil Remington. There's the magic. It's like when you consider what those cars were, what the GT40s were, they were crap. They were absolute crap. It was Phil's genius, Phil Remington's genius, that built those cars. That in the movie they talk about the brake thing. That was Rem, and Rem was the one who figured out the aerodynamics. He really made the car. He built the car. They gave him that thing from Europe, and he made it work. He was. We were on our way to Daytona with the Toyotas, our first big race with 4 cars, and Rem's looking at the cars, and he said, because these were production-based cars originally, the first cars that we had, and he said, wait, it rains in Daytona, and you get temperatures and all kinds of things. These cars don't have any defrosters or wipers, and magically made it happen within hours on 4 cars. That no one touches this guy.
Yeah.
In fact, his bench was the way it was the last day he left and went home and got sick. But they have now taken that bench with his bib on it, and it's in the Smithsonian. He was that important and is that important.
I interviewed Colin Comer not long ago, and Colin talked about how important Rem was to him and what a great friendship they had developed.
He was such a gentleman and so soft-spoken, but he was a magician. He was an absolute genius with metal.
Yeah.
Nobody could touch him. The only other guy, and fortunately for me in my career, I also had a chance to work with Doane Spencer. Doane, one of the premier hot rod guys, who was working and running Chris Cord's cars when I worked with Chris, had built these 2 Chevy Monzas, which were actually, we were on the grid at Daytona 24 hours, and Bill France Sr. was walking the grid. The cars were pretty close together, and he's looking at the cars, and I said, Mr. France, hi, what do you think? He said, these are the most beautiful American race cars I have ever seen in my life. And they were magic. They were show cars. I mean, it was brilliant.
Pretty good compliment coming from the guy who owned NASCAR.
Yeah. No, it was and they were so stunningly beautiful, and they were bloody fast too. And Chris Cord we introduced Chris. I worked for Chris to bring sponsorship to the team. We put Budweiser on the car. And when I was helping Dan running get the Toyota program together, introduced Chris to Dan, and they became great friends for years. Chris ended up winning a GTO championship for him, and it was one of those great friendships that endured.
Fantastic. Terry, when did you become aware of this funny little German car called a Porsche?
At Riverside Raceway and in Newport Beach. Growing up in Newport Beach, at one point in the very early 60s, it was said that 60% of every Porsche built was in Orange County. So, in Chick Iverson, Volkswagen, Porsche, we could go down and look at the cars. In fact, I can tell you exactly where I was when I saw my first Porsche Speedster and decided it's over. I have to have that. I can't live until I have that car. I ended up getting one, a black 58, and it was the best. It's a little 100-point car that my brother and I built. Spectacular. But Porsche was a huge part of the guys that I was growing up with in Newport that had some dough, had a Porsche. My dad, this was such a game changer. I was probably between 16 and 17. My dad bought let's 1970, 71. He bought a 59 coupe, and I polished the car every Saturday, and he let me drive it every Saturday night. And I was a god. I was a god. I went everywhere in that car. And my brother had put a burst exhaust on it, so it was loud and made all kinds of crazy noise, and it was so much fun. And I was confident that this was, now I'm the king of the world. Until one morning I was in the wet and on an off ramp, thought I'm in a Porsche and I can do this. So I went through way too fast, lost it, and put it into a guardrail right up to the windshield. And so tow truck gets me, we go down to Iverson. Fortunately, Rod Emery's grandfather was head of Valley Customs. He was a genius. He was the Phil Remington of custom cars. And he was there, he ran the body shop. He put a front clip on that car. You couldn't tell it wasn't new right out of the factory.
Wow.
The only thing wrong was that the day, I picked the car up the day it was finished, and I did it again. I crashed it, and just as bad the second time. The added irony was that the same tow truck driver who picked me up the first time shows up. Only this time he gives me 4 business cards. He says, "Hey kid, take these. You're going to need them." And it was. Dad never gave me any crap about it.
And you weren't hurt.
I wasn't hurt, but I had enough stories from my grandmother about him growing up and what he did and what he was. But also, he was a car lover, racer, Porsche lover.
He understood.
He understood. And it was later when my son rolled my BMW 320i in the parking lot of the Newport Pier, and he called me and he says, "Dad, I crashed the car." I said, "Oh boy, you okay?" And he said, Yeah. And I said, "Well, what happened? How bad is it?" And he said, "Well, we rolled it." I said, "You rolled the car in the Newport Pier?" He says, "Yeah. We got into some sand and didn't see the sand, and the car slid, hit the curb, and flipped us over." I said, "Are there any bruises on you at all?" He said, "No, none at all." I said, "Okay, we're going to tell the cops when they get there that all of those bruises were caused in the wreck." He wrecked a Rabbit of mine, a Volkswagen Rabbit of mine. He wrecked the BMW. But I had 5 crashes before I was 18. The state took my license away 3 times before I was 18.
I had the same experience. I came within like a point of losing my license when I was 18. I had to go to special traffic school for hardcore offenders.
Yeah. First time was 30 days. Second time was 60 days. The other was 90 days. But it didn't teach me anything. But cars to me were everything. That was part of growing up in Orange County. Cars, Porsches, racing, drag racing. Road racing was a lot more interesting to me than drag racing. I thought going fast and doing this is really important, but watching the skill of the drivers. And then another part of Porsche, watching the Rodriguez brothers at Riverside in the RSKs and the RSRs was heaven. I mean, these guys, these little bitty cars would pass everybody, but then there was a mile straight and they'd get repassed. Then they'd catch up, and it was like a ballet. And then Scooter Patrick in the 904. Mark Donahue shows up in the 91730 that's upstairs, the Sunoco car. Some of the best, most beautiful things you've ever seen, and then the worst, all at the same time, because as magnificent as the car is, and I think it's 1,200 horsepower, the car was so bloody fast that by the end of the first lap, after a mile straightaway, the car had disappeared. The rest of the cars were still coming down. It just meant, okay, this series is over. It's done. There's no way to compete with this one car. It's such total domination. But watching the car and listening to the car was magic.
And Can-Am was a really special thing, a fleeting moment in motorsport history, but incredibly special.
Yeah, that was, Can-Am was the official, bring and race what you got, and no rules. The McLarens showing up was almost the same thing as the Porsche showing up, is that they just destroyed, the competition. But there were so many great cars. And the other part of it was that there were so many great drivers. All the major drivers were in that series. Same with Formula 5000. In fact, all of the Europeans came over for Formula 5000, which was essentially a tiny chassis and a stock block. So everyone could afford to be in it. So everyone was. It was sensational, but it only lasted a couple of years.
Yeah.
But Can-Am was something really quite special.
Let's talk about this current Porsche exhibit at the Petersen. How do you put something of this magnitude together? Obviously, it's a significant exhibit because it's the 75th anniversary of Porsche.
Yeah. Actually started a number of years ago when we met Dr. Wolfgang Porsche here at the museum. It was, I think, a Thursday morning at the beginning of Car Week, or the LA Auto Show. And the board of directors, the Porsche board, had a meeting here. They'd taken a room and had a meeting. And we ran into him. And we did the tour of the museum, and we're on the circular stairs, and we came down, and we're on the landing in the first floor inside of the Mullen Gallery, and we're looking at the art of Bugatti. And it was the history of 3 generations of Bugatti, with musical instruments, furniture, paintings, the cars, of course, and sculpture. And we said to Wolfgang, we can do this for you for your 70th anniversary. And he turned around to his guys and he said, let's do it. And so we did a major 50-car show exhibit for the 70th anniversary. So naturally, the relationship grew from there. Dr. Porsche is now on our board as an honorary board member, but he visits every year, and we have a great relationship. But this year, to do the 75th, this is one of the things that going back to an earlier question, is that what makes the Petersen unique. How do you make another Porsche exhibit with 40 cars interesting? Well, we decided that because of the American influence and the people involved in influencing the brand and supporting the brand, and the brand supporting them here in America, let's do this about Americans and especially Californians, not the car. We can show the cars that they drove or that they used, but tell the stories of the people. So Max Hoffman, John von Neumann, Waszek Polak, the 3 guys really who brought the brand to life here in the U.S. The stories are well told upstairs. But then you have the Patrick Dempseys and the Otis Chandlers and the Donahue car with from Penske. We have a Porsche Speedster on loan from the Revs Institute that is the winningest Porsche in history, or Speedster in history. And we have a Continental that was brought in, but Lincoln sued them for using the Continental name. It was like it's same as when Porsche started building the 901.
And the Peugeot company objected.
Because they own all of the 3-digit numbers with 0 in the middle.
Right.
So then it became the 911. But the Porsche story is so heavily influenced by especially Southern California because of the racing, because of the sunshine, because you had so many tracks. Palm Springs, Santa Barbara, the road races at the airports there, Riverside, which was the king of all the Southern California tracks. I'm trying to think of, Willow Springs was built, but it still has always been pretty much a test track. But I think when you take the major tracks around the country, Porsche was always a dominant player there. But it was also because Porsche really understood customer service at the tracks. They could support the teams at the tracks, and they would support the teams, in their shops. But they always had a wonderful support group that were real serious about winning. A great story and a great hero in all of that was Alwyn Springer. Alwyn Springer is one of my real heroes. This is one of the most hardcore Germans you've ever met. He's got a book out now that has a picture of him in a headset, and he showed me. He says, "Remember me when in these days?" I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Remember you would come and say hello, and I would say, he said, I can't do that anymore, but I was working. I didn't want to talk to anybody."
I'm actually going to be interviewing him fairly soon, and he admits freely that he was not a nice guy in those days.
No, he wasn't.
He was a tough son of a gun.
He was.
Yeah.
But Alwyn Springer was one of the co-founders and operators of Andile, and then as that grew and became more prominent, then he became head of Porsche Motorsport North America. Waszek Polak, that's his story. Waszek was the first guy to figure out how to make the
Terry, you're thinking of the four-cam. The Furman motor.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Waszek, as an engine guy, was at the Alwyn of his age, the first of the Alwyns.
Right, in the late 50s.
In the late 50s. And because of his magic, he was so serious and so dedicated and so capable that everyone went to him. So he became prominent, well-known, and respected, and then they appointed him the first dealer in Redondo.
Right.
That we used to drive up to see the cars in the showroom, because that was magic.
Even Johnny von Neumann took cars to Waszek to have them prepared.
Oh yeah. There's nobody better.
Yeah.
Nobody better. And that's what happened with Alwyn. That's what's one of the interesting parts of racing history, because you have all of the drivers who became heroes. They couldn't have done it without Alwyn and his magic, because there were other cars that were fast, but if you didn't have an Andile engine, you probably are not winning. It was just that simple.
It was the hot rod Porsche engine.
Absolutely.
For racing.
Yeah. And that was his way of coping. Let's not get involved in a lot of chit-chat. Let's get after it here. Let's do what we need to do.
Terry, a lot has been made of Porsche as an evolutionary phenomenon. When I say evolutionary, what I mean is it's they stuck with more or less the same platform and layout for decades and decades. It just worked for them, and they continued to refine and polish. And you've kind of seen that in both as a Porsche owner and in the racing world.
Porsche's stubbornness to stick with what they knew and to build on that and to grow. It's a great example of a mindset that we have here, is that we do an awful lot of things good. There's things that we want to do better, but for us to improve, it's going to be incremental changes and incremental improvements on what we do to continue to get better and better. That you may not end up with this ta-da and this breakthrough idea on what we're going to do as a museum, although yesterday we were talking about just one of those things. But I think somebody was talking to me the other day about killer whales, about how bright they are, and I said, I was in the theme park business with killer whales for eight years, and the one thing that I really got stuck in my mind was that these mammals never had to get out of the ocean and learn how to walk. They have evolved over millions of years into the dominant powers in the ocean. And so Porsche stuck to what they knew and continued to be dogged about it, but they kept refining and finding ways to improve. When you consider what Piëch did with the 917, and that was the new engine, new technology, bet the barn on it, and built a car that was virtually undrivable. I mean, you help me with this. Who was the first test pilot in the 917s?
Well,
because the story is magnificent.
I'm trying to. So John Wyer was involved in the development period because the long tail was squirrely.
Beyond words.
Yes.
Yeah.
Vic Elford. Was the guy who was pretty fearless about driving it.
Vic was the guy.
But a lot of drivers walked away from the car after a couple laps. They said this thing is a death trap.
So here's the Vic Elford story.
Yeah.
When you consider when Porsche did break away from tradition or what years and years and years of experience, especially on road cars, when Piëch bet the barn on the 917 and created this car that Vic Elford said was virtually undrivable. In fact, he said that at Le Mans, the car was so squirrely that you couldn't drive it straight on the Mulsanne, and the cars would watch for him in their mirrors and move way over to the side to avoid being hit by him. And he said there were several times where he actually had to put the car, two tires in the grass to get by the other cars. And I'm thinking to myself, how fast are you going when you're doing that? And how much are you willing to bet? Talk about betting the barn. This might have been one of the bravest men I've ever met. Actually, that was one of Gurney's. Gurney said that the bravest man he ever knew was, now I'm going to go dumb on this.
I'll help you out.
Jochen Rindt.
Ah, okay.
Said Rindt was the bravest man he'd ever seen.
Wow.
He said Clark was the fastest man he'd ever seen. He also said that he was the only one that Clark feared. That's what his father told Dan at Jimmy's funeral.
That is interesting.
Yeah. Amazing. But yeah, that Vic Elford, when you consider you've got a car that's undrivable and you're going 220 miles an hour and it's undrivable, but you keep your foot in it, are you nuts? You have to be so talented as to beyond. That's the gods doing that.
Yeah, and I suspect that Vic, of course, was an enormous talent, and he had guts, but he had also put all his eggs in that racing basket, And Porsche had taken a chance on him. Out of nowhere, he started racing in rally and had gone so far in such a short time. I feel like he just he wanted to hold on for dear life and just roll the dice. That's how I see it.
I think that's great. I don't know that much about him.
Yeah.
We had him here on a panel for the 70th, and I was mesmerized. I was absolutely mesmerized.
I think it's interesting, too, that Vic Elford was a guy who didn't suffer fools, and he was very outspoken and frank. He'd just tell you like it was.
Yeah. Dan was like that. Dan was...
No BS.
Yeah. Well, Alwyn, Phil Hill, who became a friend. Phil, I can't call Phil my friend. Phil was one of the guys that I worshipped and was around a lot. My wife and Alma, his wife, became very close, and we ended up at a number of things and became friendly with the family. But Phil was always Phil to me. I mean, this was, you don't enter that you don't get too close to Phil. But he was a very special guy, one of the fastest minds, and the stories about him and his temper. We saw that first at Riverside. Phil was in a Ferrari. He was standing. The mechanic was changing the right front, and somebody else had just grabbed pole. Phil pushed the mechanic out of the way, finished banging jumped in the car and went. But he was so talented, so enormously talented. Bob Mosier, who was his apprentice, that ended up running Hill and Vaughn. It was a kid,
the restoration shop,
on a bicycle that used to stop by Phil's house when he was working on the cars. Eventually, they started a relationship. He went to work for him, ran Hill and Vaughn. He was telling me that they were in the canyons here in Santa Monica Mountains one day, and it was misting, and Phil's driving an 8,000-pound locomobile. And this guy in an Aston is dogging him behind him, and it pissed him off. And he says, watch this. He stands on it, and now he's drifting the locomobile through the canyon, and the guy in the Aston can't keep up with him. You can't do that. That's impossible.
And that locomobile was likely mechanical brakes, rear wheels only.
Just impossible to do.
Yeah.
But this man had touch that, and that was one of the things that was said about his career, is that he didn't try hard enough a number of times, but he always finished the races. So if he knew he had a mechanical difficulty, that if he had pushed the car further, he'd break down and he would DNF, but he would finish.
Did Phil ever talk to you about his retirement from racing?
It was not necessarily about his retirement, but there were parts of him that understood death and understood and feared it and respected it. In fact, he did say, and he said it publicly in articles, that the guys who died in his era, it was their fault. Because the cars are so dangerous, the tracks were so dangerous, that if you tried something in the wrong spot and didn't pull it off, you could be dead. And so what do you want to do? Do you want to win the race? You want to finish the race? You want to go home? Or are you willing, you're going to take a chance that is lethal? And I said, how can you say that? And he said, because it was true. But he said the same thing about the Nürburgring, the 14-mile track, that if you couldn't memorize the track, you'd never be fast. I said, how do you memorize 14 miles of track? And he said, well, you do it. That's why you're there.
One corner at a time.
Yeah.
In fact, speaking of death and how close he was to it, the guys around him, Wolfgang von Trips.
Yeah.
They were
that day.
Yeah. The picture behind you. Yeah. When Phil became world champion, Trips had been killed, and he had actually been the points leader.
Yeah. And that was the worst and best moment of your life. You've just won the world championship for Ferrari, and your teammate is dead. So he couldn't celebrate because of it. You just wouldn't. A man of conscience certainly wouldn't. I mean, your pal's done, and it was a real bittersweet, end to that part of the career. And he moved on from there, and then had some rides with BRM and some other teams that went nowhere. That they looked promising on paper going into the season with what they had to offer, but it didn't work.
Did Phil ever talk to you about his relationship with Enzo Ferrari?
No, but Alma has. Alma. He wanted Phil to drive him back to wherever they were, because he always had his mistress with him, and he wanted the cover to have somebody in the car instead of just him with the sweet mama.
I suspect that probably rubbed Phil Hill the wrong way.
I think you put up with it if you're driving for Ferrari. You know what you're getting into. It irked the crap out of Alma, but Alma's very outspoken. So and a laugh a minute, and was a really great partner with Phil. But Phil understood who he was driving for.
Sure.
I mean, there were a lot of things going on that maybe you weren't personally pleased about, but that's, there's some things that along the way in life that present that. But he certainly respected Ferrari, that what he was able to produce over the years. I mean, he won for him 3 times at Le Mans, with Jean Debienne. Another great story with Jean Debienne. Jean Debienne always wanted Phil to finish the race so that he could get showered and dressed so he'd look good and he'd have a couple of girls on his arm for the victory pictures.
It was a glamorous time in racing. Part and parcel of that was the risk and the danger and the guys getting killed. A lot of sort of contradictions in a way.
Well, the contradictions in racing of the best time, the worst times, the best times, the most dangerous times. Jackie Stewart addressed that the loudest and was criticized for it, but was really the man who made the changes come about.
After Jimmy Clark was killed.
After Jimmy was killed, and there were so many things that were wrong with the tracks. They were so bloody dangerous. I mean, you had roads. You were racing on roads. When you look at the old Nürburgring at Spa, some of those European tracks, there was no runoff at all. You get off the road and you're done, and you're doing it for a sport, and it just wasn't necessary. But the sport had grown from the origin was cars on roads, boom, and we've got a race. And so it was evolution, if you will, but. Jackie saw the contradiction of this is really exciting. No, for us it's really dangerous. We're risking our lives, and not all the equipment was all that good either. That was another part of it, is that the roads were dangerous as hell, but Jesus, so were the cars. We were with my brother and Jim Busby bought some Tyrrells with the candy livery on them, so I don't recall the years of that. But Buzz drove it a couple of years, and he said, God, I'm driving a coffin. If I wad one of these things up, I'm wadded up too. And we're doing this for sport now. This is just too dangerous. There's no reason to take that kind of a risk. And when you consider what those cars were for so long, I'm always astounded of the things that people will put up with. I was talking to Bobby Rahal, who's on our board of directors, about his first Indy car. He said it was so tight. I was talking about getting fitted for a seat, and he said, no, my car was so tight, there was no seat. I sat on the floor pan of the car with nothing. And I'm thinking, who would do that? Well, it would be a guy who's getting his first Indy car drive, and you're not going to complain. You just get in the car and go.
You just made me think of Dave McDonald, and unfortunately, he got killed in a very experimental car that was not ready to race.
One of Dan's biggest fan. I mean, he was a big fan of Dave McDonald. Yeah. And McDonald was enormously talented.
Yeah. Terry, looking back on your career at the Petersen, what's been a couple of the highlights? What are you most proud of?
The people. The team that exists here is what makes this place work. It's a collaborative, if combative. We respect everyone's opinion, and we want it. We don't necessarily always accept it, but you have a voice and a vote, but it's a very good group of very talented, passionate people who take it quite seriously, what we're doing, and that is we're preserving, we're introducing the automobile to thousands and thousands and thousands of children every year. We have 175 people on staff now, and 45 of them are in our education department. We have 5 people in what is now becoming a world-class archive and library. and we're able to share. Right now, we've got 10 million films or photos from the original Petersen archives, and about 1.5 million of them have been digitized. We've got thousands and thousands of feet of film that have been digitized now, and they're protected in a cold storage that Bill Amundsen, one of our board members, provided, but his foundation. But it's the people that have decided what we really want to do is get great people and turn them loose. Let them do their magic, and that the rest of it will get us home. And if we collaborate on where we're going collectively and then turn them loose, that's when the magic arrives.
So in preparing for today, one of the things that people who know Terry Karges have told me is that the secret to Terry's leadership is he knows who to tap. He knows how to hire the right people, the most talented people, and set them loose.
I've been blessed. I've been lucky with good options. The key is finding or watching people and then watching them grow. Is that our team in here now, Brian Stevens, who is our exhibits director, Brian's been with us 17 years and started out here as a carpenter building the exhibits. But as over time, watching him, talking to him, we gave him a shot to become the exhibits director, and he's been terrific. Michael Bodell, our COO, Michael is, I was looking for a marketing manager and read this guy's resume one day, and I thought, who is this? And let's get him in here. We interviewed Michael and hired him, and he just celebrated his 9th year. Michael was 25 when I made him the deputy director, because I called Richard Varner, our chairman. I said, what if you got a guy who absolutely you cannot let him get away? And he said, whatever it takes. So we made Michael 25 years old deputy director, and when he was 30, he became COO. Jason Hartwig, our education director, has one of the most dedicated, excited groups in providing education across the board. Our library archivist, Laura Fisher, is passionate beyond measure. Our team that takes care of the cars and the collection, the word passionate doesn't quite cover it. And they've also recently been all certified in car care. That now all of them are master certified detailers. And we're able to take care of paint now for the first time in 30 years the way it should be. As the best museums in the world would be very proud to have these guys on their team. That's the stuff. And then with Michael and what I do, Anna Song, who is now in charge of our development and membership, we've never, ever had that kind of touch with the members and outreach with the members and our donors, ever. And she's magical on that. And Anna was a part-timer working in the membership department, and it's noticing things. I asked her to do something one day, and she did it and came back with it, and I thought, wow, what was that? And then another time we were talking, and she walked back in a little later, and she said, you said you had to write a letter to somebody, and you mean something like this? And it was as if I had written it myself. And I thought, oh boy, where have you been? Lincoln Ramirez, who now is in charge of our groups and our collection and where the cars are going to shows and what cars we're selling, what cars we're bringing in. I mean, he's spectacular. And he does such a great job. That, again, the whole group, Leslie Kendall, best chief historian in the business, the most unheralded, unpublished. He's about to publish a book on the cars built in L.A., and surprisingly, I guess, it's about 650 cars, manufacturers that have built cars here in L.A. over time, over the years, since 1912. 1900, we got the first.
Sure. The Tourist and...
Yeah.
There's all sorts, yeah.
So, again, Bobby Jimenez, who runs our admissions and our retail store. Our retail store is probably doing a $3 to $4 more per capita than any other museum. Bobby started as a clerk and then worked his way up, and now he's our director of retail.
I got to tell you, Terry, that in working with various members of your staff, it's always been such a pleasure. They're great people.
Yeah. The other part, then, I would really be mistaken if I didn't mention our board of directors. There isn't a group of automotive enthusiasts anywhere that touches these people. This is, I mean, besides some of the better known names in racing like Penske and Ray Hall and Charlie Neerberg and then Bill Amundsen, our chairman Richard Varner is the CFO, COO, banker, and head of Moto America, the motorcycle road racing series in the country. He's a rancher, a gas and oil guy, but also a motorcycle maniac and a fun guy, a lot of prairie wisdom there. But Bruce Meyer must be the best known, most liked of any car guy in the car collector hobby in the world. I was with him at a show in Geneva. We were walking through the show, and the only guy who got stopped more was Jackie Stewart. But every couple of feet, Bruce, and these are all Europeans. I'd never seen any of them before, but it was like you could walk into the back end of a motorcycle shop in Fresno, and the guys are, Bruce, it's Bruce. But no one's done more for the museum than Bruce or the collector car hobby.
He's a great ambassador for both.
Oh, God. He's the reason I think the museum exists. Bruce was with Bob when the decisions were being discussed, and I think he's the one who convinced him, you've got to put your name on this thing and get it open. He's the one who recruited me. But I think when I look at it, and then David Sidoric, I mean, David's brilliant. He's the reason that this building turned out to be what it is. He said, we've got to change this, and found an architect, Gene Cohn, to come in and do the exterior. Peter Mullen, who is the chairman who came in to run the campaign to get the funding to make this museum what it is today. God.
Was Otis Chandler involved in the evolution of the museum?
I don't. Honestly, that's a really great question. No, I've never had that question asked, but I'm willing to bet that Otis was a member of the checkered flag,
right,
that Bruce started, the membership group.
He was a great enthusiast.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
One of the
Peter Mullen's museums are in the Otis Chandler buildings in Oxnard.
Which is a fantastic collection, I might add. So, Terry, this Porsche exhibit is fantastic, but what else can we look forward to coming up?
Well, the future exhibits and things that we're working on, we work 2 to 3 years out. And I can tell you that, well, as an example right now, Tesla will run. Tesla is so popular, we may extend that exhibit. It's supposed to run for a year, but it is so bloody popular that it may go longer.
I have to say, I was surprised at how much is in that exhibit hall. It's not just a couple of cars and a battery pack. The story is told really well.
It's the most extensive exhibit we've ever mounted, and it couldn't have been done without the help of Tesla and their team. I think I mentioned at one point, it's my understanding that there were as many as 220 people from Tesla helping them work on putting all those things together, and then they brought in a crew from Egypt of 12 guys to help with the installation that are experts. Is that when you look at the tunnel and the SpaceX and all the things, the hanging car in parts and all the things that they've done, brilliant, absolutely brilliant, and it's paying dividends. I mean, that people are coming from everywhere. We're working with Netflix on something about Formula One. We're talking to a couple of major Formula One sponsors. Can't name them because the one would be a dead giveaway about what it was about, but
sure,
working with them about a motorsports gallery. The one that'll be a blockbuster will be when Tesla goes out of the Mullen Gallery, will be Lowrider. because it'll be lowrider cars, art, culture, and everything combined. And I think it's not just that 52% of the LA population is Latino, and in fact I think it's 54% now, but it's such a beautiful art form, and it's so intricate, and it's so expensive, and it's so time. Many of these cars took 5 years to do, and so to be able to see that all collected and appreciated. We did a lowrider exhibit several years ago, and what was cool is that on opening night of the exhibit, a lot of the guys came in zoot suits, and it was in the Hammer Gallery, and what ended up happening is that right next door in the Mullen Gallery was the Bugatti exhibit, and a lot of the guys were over in the Bugatti exhibit with their kids, and they're posing, but they really got that they were being honored. Their art was being honored on the equivalency with Bugatti, with as much as anybody else as a car culture art form. Lowriders are equal or better than most or any.
I have to say, lowriders are to car culture, in a sense, what jazz is to music. It's a uniquely American art form that's an outgrowth of other traditions.
Yeah,
I think that's really special.
It truly is. I mean, and we've got the best of the best right here in LA. So Brian Stevens has been working on that. That we're working with some factories on that would give us a chance to go from historic through to modern day. As an example, I'd love to do an Aston, go back to when Shelby won Le Mans
in '59,
and then you've got Lance Stroll right now, or his father with the Aston company. What are the modern cars? And so we're looking at. Well, we're talking to Porsche more, always talking to Porsche, Audi, BMW, Mercedes, on the historic level. There's always Hollywood cars that we do that are really, really well received. The interesting thing about the Hollywood cars is that you can walk by and say, this is Clark Gable's Cadillac, 38 Cadillac that he gave to his wife Carol Lombard for their birthday. And if you look on the glove box, there's St. Christopher that he always had, and then who's Clark Gable?
Yeah.
What? Who's that? And so the Stars cars and the things like that, unless it's a unique car, it loses its relevance over time.
Well, you guys are always moving forward. I would say you're not chasing trends, you're setting them in many respects. And it truly is an epicenter in the epicenter of the car world. So
that's a great compliment. Thank you so much.
Terry Karges, Executive Director of the Petersen Automotive Museum. Check him out. It's at petersenmuseum.org, and I'll have links in the show notes. Terry, thank you so much.
Maurice, and thank you so much. This has been a real pleasure, a real treat. I mean, anyone as enthusiastic and knowledgeable as you is always a great treat to be with.
I appreciate it.
That's all for this episode of Horsepower Heritage. Join me for episode 101 on Wednesday, October 18th, when we'll be talking about the mysterious fate of a pioneer in automotive history. Don't forget to click that follow button and give me a 5-star rating and review. And until next time, my friends, I'm Maurice Merrick. Thanks for listening.